What if I told you that one of football's most hated rules is actually the reason football became the world's most beautiful game? Imagine this. A striker breaks through the defense. The crowd rises to its feet. The ball hits the back of the net. For a brief moment, thousands of people celebrate together. Then, one whistle, one raised flag, silence. The goal is gone. Every weekend, this exact scene repeats itself somewhere in the world. Fans blame the assistant referee. Players throw their hands into the air. Commentators replay the moment again and again. And one question always returns. Why does this rule even exist? After all, wouldn't football be far more exciting without offside? More goals, more action, less controversy. It sounds obvious, but history tells a completely different story. Because there was once a time when football had almost no offside rule at all. And the result wasn't a more exciting game. It was a completely broken one. Long before giant stadiums echoed with the sound of millions of supporters, before television, before professional leagues, football was a game without a true identity. Every town played differently. Every school had its own version. Some allowed carrying the ball, some didn't. Some matches had 20 players on each side. Others had even more. There was no universal rule book, only one shared objective: get the ball into the opponent's goal as quickly as possible. At first, that sounded simple, but people quickly discovered something surprising. When humans are given complete freedom, they rarely choose the most beautiful solution. They choose the easiest one. And football was no exception. Imagine you're playing one of those early matches. You're tired. The field is muddy. Passing accurately over long distances is difficult. Running constantly is exhausting. So one player has an idea. What if I just stay beside their goal? Instead of helping defend, instead of helping build attacks, he simply waits. Minutes pass. Then someone launches the ball forward. No clever passing, no teamwork, no movement. Just one long kick. One waiting player. One easy chance. At first, it seems brilliant. Soon another team copies it. Then another. Before long, almost everyone is doing exactly the same thing. Without realizing it, football had discovered its first exploit. Not a bug in the rules, a shortcut. And humans have always loved shortcuts. Whether it's business, technology, video games, or sports. Whenever one strategy becomes dramatically easier than every other strategy, people naturally abandon creativity and chase efficiency instead. That's not because they're lazy. It's because our brains are designed to conserve energy. Why solve a difficult problem when an easy answer already exists? The result was predictable. Matches became chaotic. Midfields became empty. Players gathered at opposite ends of the pitch instead of working together. Long balls replaced intelligent passing. Entire attacks lasted only a few seconds. The game became less about creating opportunities and more about waiting for one lucky kick. To many people watching, it simply wasn't very interesting. The people responsible for organizing football faced an unexpected challenge. They weren't trying to stop goals. They were trying to save the game itself. So they asked an unusual question. How do you stop players from choosing the easiest solution without stopping them from attacking altogether? The answer they eventually found would become one of the most influential rules in sports history. Instead of rewarding players for standing still, the game would reward players for moving together. Instead of encouraging shortcuts, it would encourage timing. Instead of waiting, players would need to think. That single idea would quietly transform football forever. But the first version of the offside rule was far more extreme than anything modern fans would recognize. And strangely enough, it almost made football too difficult. That unexpected mistake would force the sport to evolve again. The first attempt to solve the problem was simple. Too simple. The earliest offside rule declared that if you were ahead of the ball, you were offside. Immediately. It didn't matter how many defenders stood between you and the goal. It didn't matter whether you touched the ball. Your position alone was enough. To modern football fans, that sounds almost impossible. But at the time, it worked. The players who had been waiting beside the goal suddenly disappeared. Everyone was forced to move together. For the first time, football became less about individual opportunism and more about collective movement. The game immediately looked different. Attacks developed more slowly. Passing became more important. Players began looking for teammates instead of simply kicking the ball as far as they could. It seemed like the perfect solution, until another problem appeared. Goals became rare, very rare. Defending was easier than ever. Attackers had almost no freedom to explore space. The cure had become almost as harmful as the disease. Football had escaped one extreme, only to fall into another. Once again, the people shaping the game faced a difficult decision: leave the rule as it was, or risk breaking the game all over again. So they chose something far more difficult: balance. Instead of asking whether an attacker was ahead of the ball, they began asking a different question: how many defenders are still between the attacker and the goal? It sounds like a tiny adjustment, but in reality, it changed everything. Now, attackers no longer had to remain behind the ball. They could move into dangerous areas, but only if they timed their run perfectly. For the first time, speed alone wasn't enough. A player could be the fastest on the pitch and still fail. Another player could be slower, yet score simply because the timing was perfect. Football had quietly become a game of intelligence. Imagine standing on the edge of the defensive line. You can see open space. You know the pass is coming. Leave too early, you're offside. Wait too long, the defender reaches the ball first. The difference between success and failure is sometimes less than half a second. That tiny window creates something extraordinary: anticipation. The crowd senses it. The passer senses it. The runner senses it. Everyone holds their breath. Then, the pass arrives. The run is perfectly timed. The defender reacts a fraction too late. Goal. To many fans, it looks effortless, but beneath that single moment lies years of practice, trust, communication, and an almost invisible understanding between teammates. That's the hidden beauty most people never notice. The offside rule doesn't slow football down. It creates tension. Without the possibility of failure, success loses much of its meaning. Think about your favorite football goal. Was it memorable because the ball crossed the line, or because everything happened at exactly the right moment? The curved run, the perfectly weighted pass, the defender desperately trying to recover, the stadium holding its breath. The goal is only the final sentence. The real story begins several seconds earlier. That's why coaches spend countless hours training movement without the ball, because football is often decided by players who aren't even touching it. Every step changes space. Every movement forces a decision. Every decision creates another opportunity. In reality, the ball spends surprisingly little time at any one player's feet. The game is really about everything happening around it, and the offside rule is one of the invisible forces shaping every movement on the pitch. Without most people realizing it, it transformed football from a game of waiting into a game of constant thinking. But the biggest surprise was still waiting, because the offside rule didn't just change attackers, it completely changed defenders too. And that unexpected consequence would reshape football forever. For most people, the offside rule is something attackers have to worry about. But that's only half the story, because the moment the rule changed, defending changed forever. Imagine standing in a defensive line. You aren't just watching the ball, you're watching your teammates, you're watching the attackers, you're listening, you're communicating, and you're making decisions every second. One defender steps forward, the others must follow. One defender hesitates, the entire line can collapse. In modern football, 4 defenders often move like a single living organism, not because they're connected by strings, but because every player understands that one mistake can change everything. This is where football becomes something much bigger than speed or strength. It becomes synchronized decision-making. Scientists who study teamwork often describe high-performing groups as systems where individuals constantly predict one another's actions. Football is one of the clearest examples of this idea. No player can see the entire field. No player knows exactly what will happen next. Yet somehow, 11 people repeatedly make split-second decisions that fit together almost perfectly. The offside rule quietly encourages that behavior. Attackers learn to time their runs together. Midfielders learn exactly when to release the pass. Defenders learn exactly when to step forward. Everyone is reacting to everyone else. It's less like chaos and more like an orchestra. Each player performs a different part, but the music only works if everyone follows the same rhythm. That's why removing the offside rule wouldn't simply create more goals, it would destroy the rhythm itself. Now imagine a completely different world. Tomorrow morning, football announces one shocking decision. The offside rule has been abolished. At first, the internet explodes with excitement. Fans imagine scorelines like 8-7. Commentators predict endless attacking football. Everyone expects entertainment. But coaches see something very different. They don't see excitement, they see opportunity. Within days, training sessions begin to change. One attacker is told to stay beside the opponent's goal, then another. Defenders refuse to push forward because leaving space behind becomes far too dangerous. Midfielders stop building patient attacks. Instead, they launch long balls over and over again. The distance between teammates grows larger. The spaces in midfield become emptier. Slowly, the beautiful patterns that make football unique begin to disappear. Ironically, there may actually be more goals, but fewer memorable ones. Because the most unforgettable goals are rarely the easiest. They're born from movement, from deception, from perfect timing, from creating something that didn't exist just a second earlier. Without offside, many of those moments would never happen. The game would slowly reward waiting instead of creating. And that's a fascinating lesson that reaches far beyond football. Human beings naturally search for the shortest path to success. If a shortcut exists, most people will eventually use it. That's true in business, it's true in technology, it's true in education, and it's true in sport. The role of good rules isn't to remove freedom, it's to guide freedom. The best rules don't tell people exactly what to do, they simply make the most creative solution, also the most rewarding one. That's exactly what the offside rule accomplishes. It quietly pushes players toward intelligence instead of convenience, toward cooperation instead of isolation, toward creativity instead of shortcuts. Without most fans ever realizing it, every perfectly timed run, every clever through ball, every defensive line moving together exists because one invisible rule keeps encouraging better decisions. And perhaps that's the greatest trick the offside rule has ever played. Most people only notice it when it's broken. Here's the twist that almost nobody talks about. The offside rule was never really designed to stop goals. If that had been the objective, football's lawmakers could have invented countless simpler restrictions. They could have made the goal smaller. They could have reduced the number of attackers. They could have limited where players were allowed to stand. But they didn't. Instead, they chose something far more subtle. They changed the decisions players would make. That's the hidden genius behind the rule. The offside law doesn't control the ball. It controls behavior. Long before psychologists studied decision-making, long before scientists explored game theory, football had already discovered an incredible truth. People naturally optimize for whatever the rules reward. Reward waiting, people will wait. Reward shortcuts. People will find shortcuts. Reward teamwork. People will work together. Reward intelligent movement. People will learn to move intelligently. In other words, the offside rule doesn't create football. It shapes the kind of football we play. And that's a lesson that reaches far beyond sport. Think about almost every great game ever created. The most enjoyable ones aren't those with no rules. They're the ones with the right rules. Chess becomes fascinating because every piece has limits. Basketball becomes exciting because players can't simply stand under the basket forever. Even music becomes beautiful because rhythm and structure give creativity a foundation. Limitations don't always reduce freedom. Sometimes they create it. Football may be the greatest example of that idea. Every breathtaking through ball, every perfectly timed run, every defender stepping forward together, every last-second decision that leaves an entire stadium holding its breath exists because of one invisible line, a line that most people only notice when a goal is disallowed. Perhaps that's why the offside rule remains one of football's greatest paradoxes. Millions of people complain about it, yet the same people celebrate the beautiful football that only exists because of it. Without that invisible line, football might have become easier. It might even have produced more goals, but it almost certainly would have produced fewer unforgettable moments. Because the greatest moments in football aren't created by standing still. They're created by courage, by trust, by timing, by teammates seeing the same opportunity at exactly the same instant. Maybe that's why football continues to captivate billions of people across generations. Not because the game has no limits, but because those limits inspire endless creativity. So the next time a flag goes up and a goal disappears, try looking beyond the disappointment. You're witnessing more than a referee enforcing a rule. You're witnessing nearly 2 centuries of football protecting the balance between freedom and fairness, between simplicity and strategy, between chaos and beauty. And maybe that's the real reason the offside rule still exists. So here's one final question for you. If removing the offside rule guaranteed twice as many goals, but also meant losing the tactics, teamwork, timing, and creativity that make football beautiful, would you still want to see it disappear? Or is the offside rule secretly the very thing that makes football worth watching?